Suspension system in automobiles. Suspension system in automobile is mainly classified as dependent and independent suspension system. Dependent, there is a rigid linkage between the front wheels, whereas independent, there is no direct linkage. This allows them to move independently of each other. There are many suspension designs. McPherson suspension is the simplest one, in which spring connects the chassis to the wheel. Pushrod suspension is a monoshock suspension that consists of single spring. Leaf spring suspension is the most common one used for the heavy vehicles. Double wishbone suspension consists of two A-shaped arms. To make independent suspension, the drive rod must be in synchronization with the suspension system. Consider this assembly. A marker gives the disturbance in the wheel and hence in the chassis. Here the paper and the bump travel at the same velocity. You can see the profile. At higher speed, the bump is greater. When we use a stiff spring, the bump size is greatly reduced. When we use a soft spring, the bump size is reduced even more and the path is even more smoother. Now consider four-wheel assembly. The front wheels are connected to the stiff spring and the rear wheels are connected to the soft spring. Since the front wheels are connected to a stiff spring, there is the frame experience greater disturbance, whereas in the rear there is no greater disturbance, but there is continuous bouncing happening. Now consider the replacing dependent with the independent suspension system. Now the wheel is attached to two bars which can move freely up and down and connected to a soft spring. This ensures it can absorb all the shocks without being dependent on the linkage. But there is still a problem. The vehicle experiences shock due to the soft spring and there is no comfort to the passengers. This makes the ride uncomfortable and unpleasant. The coil spring also gives the bouncy nature to the chassis which can damage the chassis in the long run. To this problem, engineers came up with a new idea of shock absorbers or the dampers that help in reducing the shocks that are directly passed from the coil spring to the chassis of the vehicle. Let's test this on the bumps. You can see the line is straight, almost smooth in nature, even on the bouncy terrain. This makes the ride comfortable and smooth as much as possible. The front wheel is pivoted so that it can be steered in any direction while driving. It is mounted on a strong upright arm. This arm is connected to a rigid immovable cross beam by the means of two swinging arms. The knee action spring between the two swinging arms has only one action to perform, that is to cushion the bumps. Double action shock absorber performs the task of both absorbing and stretching the spring. Similar action of the spring and the shock absorber is performed by another double spring shock absorber in the rear wheels. Here is the method used by the German military to test the suspension of the tanks. Here he places a jug of beer and you can see the marvel of German engineer, no spill. Here is one more. Don't look at the girl, look at the wine. The tank performs the maneuver, but the glass does not fall. Let's understand the working of this. Here is the single wheel of the tank which is connected to the swing arm through a spindle wheel passing here, and this swing arm moves like this. The swing arm is pivoted to a torsion rod which is then anchored to a block in the other part of the hull. This is the hull of the tank and this is a pivot. You can see here it passes through the hull, and this is one more block which is the rod passes through, and there is a pivot over here which there is one more rod, torsion rod, which is anchored to the next part of the hull. This is anchored here. You can see the swinging action. The tank wheel swings like this. There is disturbance, but you can see there is no movement in the tank, the hull particularly. You can see the swinging arm moves up and down, but the other torsion rod is not moving at all. Let's understand the passive and active suspension system. You can see the truck with a passive suspension system. Now the same truck with an active suspension system is made. You can see the difference. There is no disturbance in the cabin at all. The active suspension system is controlled from the cabin by the means of electronic or other medium, whereas the passive suspension system is entirely terrain based. This is active suspension system of Tesla Model 3, which is entirely the air pressure suspension system. This is electromagnetic suspension in the Audi A8 model, which is entirely controlled by electronic means. That's all about suspension. Thank you.